they're going to find another way to deliver the goods instead of having their own employees, their own drivers, their own trucks, their own sorting facility. They're going to go subcontract that. And the government doesn't have the ability to choose winners or losers. It's the market that decides. And they don't have the incentive to make sure that these companies are successful because they don't do it for the success of the company. They just do it to buy votes.
Amazon recently announced it's shutting down operations in Quebec, cutting down about 1,700 full-time jobs and 250 seasonal positions. This comes after workers at the Laval warehouse became the first in Canada to unionize in May 2024, joining the Confédération des syndicats nationaux, CSN. Amazon tried to fight it, but the Administrative Labor Tribunal ruled against the company, finding it guilty of interfering in the process. As a result, a judge ordered Amazon to pay CSN $10,000 in moral damages and $20,000 in punitive damages, as La Presse reported. Now, Amazon plans to go back to using third-party delivery services just like it did before 2020, relying on small local businesses instead. Once again, Quebec is pushing away foreign investors by imposing different rules than the rest of the country.
7 entrepôts Amazon fermés.
Le Canadien a encore gagné.
Oui, ça, je sais. Mais
Deux. Je n'ai pas bu d'orange ce matin.
And yet, the province has everything needed to attract them. A skilled workforce, cheap and clean energy, and strategic advantages. But with the rising cost of living, endless bureaucracy, union pressures, and stifling regulations, Quebec is becoming less and less appealing for business.
On peut pas juste accepter la défaite comme ça. On peut pas juste dire, OK, la fermeture va se passer, puis on rentre chez nous. Non. La multinationale du Calice qui a fait ça, il faut qu'elle apprenne que si elle fait ça à la classe ouvrière du Québec, il y a un coût. Puis c'est pas juste le coût de le sous-traiter, blablabla. Il faut que ce coût-là, ça soit très profond. Il faut que ça fasse mal. Puis il faut que les multinationales américaines comprennent que s'ils s'en viennent faire chier la classe ouvrière du Québec, ben ça va leur coûter cher en esti.
Joining us to discuss, this is former Quebec Conservative Party leader Adrien Pouliot.
At first, it's really sad, I mean, you've got 1,500 employees that are losing their job. Amazon is not leaving the province of Quebec. They're going to find another way to deliver the goods instead of having their own employees, their own drivers, their own trucks, their own sorting facility. They're going to go subcontract that. I've been a subcontractor, for example, for Bell Canada. They decided to lay off all of their technicians who deal with the inside wiring in a house or in a business, and they subcontracted that to a company called Entourage, which I bought. And eventually I had like 2,800 employees when I sold it. And this Bell Canada's decision was just very well analyzed. Okay, our cost per hour when we have our unionized employees is, let's say, $50 an hour, including salary, the truck, blah, blah, blah. And if we subcontract, it's going to cost us half. So it doesn't take a brain surgeon to figure out that, okay, we're going to subcontract. So what's too bad, though, is that the politicians, they're blaming Amazon, but they should look in their own backyard and ask themselves, okay, why are they doing this? Well, maybe because there's too much regulation, taxes are too high, environmental regulations, business regulations, language regulations. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. And at one point, unless you give them a grant, they're going to say, well, it makes no sense for us to keep doing this, so we have to change our business model. There's a lesson somewhere here where we should think about, instead of saying, oh, we're going to boycott Amazon, I mean, Jeff Bezos doesn't even know we exist probably, so he doesn't care. But instead of blaming others, we should, do a little bit of searching and see if we don't have a problem. And the answer is yes. I mean, if you talk to a businessman in Quebec, he's going to whine about his own business. Oh, the regulations, the paperwork, there's this, there's that. But it's true in all businesses. I mean, if you talk to somebody else and ask him the taxes on wages, for example, all of the contributions to the health board and to this and to that, it's just huge. I mean, so it should be a signal that we need to reduce taxes. And the other thing we need to reduce is all these grants, all this money that we give these companies, not necessarily Amazon, but if they, for example, Northvolt, which is a great example, they got tons and tons of money and it just vaporized. It just disappeared, So, but this money comes from somewhere. It comes from your pockets. It comes from my pockets. And the government doesn't have the ability to choose winners or losers. It's the market that decides. And they don't have the incentive to make sure that these companies are successful because they don't do it for the success of the company. They just do it to buy votes. Mm-hmm. That's what they do. So it's a huge waste of money. And so what we need to do is reduce those grants that we give to these companies. Quebec is the number one. Here's somewhere we're number one. We're number one in terms of all this money we give these companies. So reduce that and take those savings, reduce taxes, reduce the regulatory burden, and that's how we will attract real businesses that will create value and wealth for Quebecers. You just look at the size of the money they take from taxes or the amount of money they spend per capita or in terms of the size of the economy, it's huge. And eventually what happens is, and it can take 50 years, it can take 20 years, but if you look at Argentina, that's what happened. Argentina was one of the world's richest countries, and eventually with the socialist governments that they had, they became poorer and poorer and poorer, and eventually they elected someone, Javier Milei, who said, look, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to chop the government by half. And that's what he's doing. And there's early signs that it's working. We'll see in the longer term. But that's what we need. We need, and in a sense, even, if you look at south of the border, you think that the U.S. is, this capitalistic country, but the government is big in the U.S. now. With every time the Democrats get, and even the Republicans, they tend to increase the size of government because elected officials and the bureaucracy and the unions, they all want a bigger state. The only people who don't want a bigger state are us, the taxpayers. So there's a huge incentive and momentum and force to increase the size of the state. And eventually somebody comes along, Ralph Klein, Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, somebody comes along and says, hey, wait a minute here. This is not working. This is not who we are. If you look at our background, our history, our culture, we are able to innovate. We can cross the street without our hands being held by the government. And somebody says, okay, we got to reduce the size of the state. But it's a big, big battle because there's so many vested interests in having a big state that it takes a lot of courage. But that's what we have to do because otherwise we're just going to get in a spin. And that's what we see. We're getting poorer and poorer every decade. We are the first generation that's going to probably leave the next generation worse off. That's a sad thing to say. So eventually it has a weight, it's part of the decision-making process of any international company. Before going somewhere, you look at, is there a talent pool? Is there an interesting business environment? What are the taxes? What are the unionization Because all these things are taken into account. And certainly, I think in Quebec, we have probably, I'd say in Canada, the first or second most constraining unionization rules, and that has a bearing. There's no doubt about it. And maybe actually, by the way, Amazon, by subcontracting to, let's say, 100, I don't know, 200, I don't know how many subcontractors are going to have, but it makes it much more difficult to unionize a subcontractor. And if a subcontractor becomes unionized and starts his costs increase, Amazon's going to say, well, that's your problem. It's not my problem. If you can't make money now because the costs of doing business have increased because of the union, well, tough luck. And so what's going to happen? The subcontractor is going to go bankrupt.
Many ways to support our journalism is to donate directly to us. We don't take the money directly in your pocket like the other media, as the mainstream media. We are just asking for it. If you want to support and you want to donate, please go over rebelfieldreports.com and please chip in what you can, and thank you in advance for your support.